Shavua Tov. Today's daf is daf Mem Beis, and we're going to begin on daf Mem Aleph Amid Beis with Tanu Rabbanon, which is about 15 lines up before the end of the Amud. If you see a Tosus, Dibra Maskil Beis Shammai, then you go up about 2 lines above that. Tanu Rabbanon, we learned in the Brisa. Kama chutim hu nosein. How many threads of tzitzis do you have to attach to the beged to fulfill the mitzvah? And the Bryce records Machlokes between Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel. Beit Shammai Omrim Arba, which means that you put 4 chutim through the hole, and then you have 4 on each side is 8. Whereas Beit Hillel Omrim Shlosha. So you put 3 strings in, fold it over, it becomes 6. The Kamatehe Mishuleshes. Mishuleshes means after the krichos, you remember that we have to surround and circle the chutim from the end of the krichos till the bottom, meaning these are the strings that are loose, that hang down below the krichos, below the circles. Beit Shammai Omrim Arba. Now we're talking about etzbos, Arba etzbos. And Arba etzbos is going to be what's called a reva shel tefach. We'll try to explain that as we go along. And Beis Hillel Omrim Sholosh. So according to Beis Hillel, the amount of the chutim, the size of the chutim that just hang down, are 3 etzbos, 3 finger breadths. V'sholosh shebeis Hillel Omrim achas mi arba b'tefach shel kol odom. So these 3 etzbos, according to Beis Hillel, measure 1/4 of a tefach. Omer of Papa, tefach doraisa arba begudol. So the gudol, or sometimes it's called the agudol, is the thumb, and 4 agudols equal a tefach. Now I'm not sure if it means the height of the agudol or the width of the agudol, and if it's the width of the agudol, where in the agudol do you measure it? Shis biktano. So 4 etzbos are equal to 6 pinkies. Chamesh betilsa. So now we're talking about the index finger, and 5 etzbos will measure I guess it says like 5 etzbos if you measure it with this finger, and 6 etzbos if you measure it with this finger, and 4 if you measure it with the thumb. So if we're going to say that 4 agudlim equal 1 tefach, and Beis Hillel requires 3 agudlim, that's 3/4 of a tefach. Omer Rav Huna, arba betoch arba umishuleshes arba. Right, so we said before that you take the 4 chutim according to Beis Shammai, and you fold them over because you put them through the hole at the corner of the beged. So that's arba betoch arba umishuleshes arba. So you have four threads that are now folded over, and where on the corner of the garment do they have to be placed? Meaning the nekev, that hole that you put on the corner, where is it? It shouldn't be on the very end of the corner, but rather it should be somewhere within four etzbos of the corner of the beged. Rav Yehuda Omar, sholosh b'toch sholosh mishuleshes sholosh. So according to Rav Huna, he wants it to be within three etzbos of the corner of the beged, as opposed to Rav Huna, who has it four etzbos from the corner of the beged, from the very bottom of the edge of the beged. Omer Rav Huna, Hilchas, so we paskin arba, right? We need four strings like Beis Shammai that have to be folded over into the nekev, making 8 strings. And it's got to be betoch sholosh mishuleshes arba, which means that it should be within 3 etzbos of the edge of the corner of the beged. Again, times 4 because of 4 corners, obviously. And he says mishuleshes arba, meaning from the end of the krichos, the loose strings that hang down on the bottom should be 4 etzbos. So we have 4 chutim, and they should be established or affixed within 3 etzbos of the edge. And the part of the chutim that hang down below the end of the krichos are equal to, in length, to 4 etzbos. So the Gemara asks, "L'meimer de isle shiura." You're assuming that tzitzis, the strings of tzitzis, have a minimum shear. Uriminu, I'll ask you a kasha from a brisa. Tzitzis, by the way, notice the word tzitzis is without a second yud. Ein tzitzis eliyotze, anything that comes out, it protrudes from the beged, that's already considered tzitzis. And therefore, ein tzitzis elamashu. All you need is the smallest amount. You don't have a shear. Ukvar olu zikne Beis Shammai v'zikne Beis Hillel Elias Yochanan ben Beseira v'Amru tzitzis ein lo shear. And they added kayotzi bo belulav she'ein bo shear. My love, what does it mean it doesn't have a shear? It simply means that ein lo shear klal. There is no measurement. There's no minimum measurement. And the Gemara says lo. That's not what it means. It can't mean that. And now we start today's Daf Mem Beis. Ein lo shear lemala. In other words, you can maximize the tzitzis as long as you want. It's laissez-faire. Aval yesh lo shear lemat, but there's a minimum shear. De'ilo temach, I'll prove it for you. He equates it with lulav. Kayotzi bo lulav ein lo shear. How can you say ein lo shear means it has no shear? What, you can have a lulav that's just this big? Nami dein lo shear klal. For Tanan, we have a Mishnah that says lulav sheyesh bo shlosha tvach gedei l'nanei kosher. You need a minimum of 3 tfachim for a lulav, and we need a 4th tefach for nanuim. Therefore, we have to say ein lo shear doesn't mean it has no shear at all, but ein lo shear l'malad has no maximum, no ceiling. Aval yesh lo shear l'mat, it does have a minimum shear. Is hochinami, just like in the case of lulav, we reinterpreted ein lo shear to mean ein lo shear l'mata. I'm sorry, ein lo shear l'mala, but yesh lo shear l'mata, which is 3 tfachim. Is hochinami here too with regard to tzitzis. Ein lo shear l'mala, there's no maximum. You can have as long as you want. Aval yesh lo shear l'mata, but we need a minimum shear. And that minimum shear, if you accept the final halacha that we saw, right, who quoted it? That was Rav Huna. Let me just get the name straight for the record. I'm sorry, Rav Papa, that it was arba. So you need 4 tzitzios, and they have to hang down 4 etzbos, and the krichos, let's say, will be 8 etzbos. So 8 plus 4 is 12. There'll be 12 etzbos. Tana Rabbana, we learned in the Brisa, tzitzis, ain't tzitzis ella enough. Enough again is the part of the threads of the tzitzis that hang loosely. They're not wound around like the krichos. V'cheinu Omer, and the Pasuk says in Yechezkel that Vayikacheni, in his vision, in his prophetic vision, he was taken by the hairs of his head, v'tzitzis roshi, by the lock of my head. However, Omer Abaye v'tzorach lefruda kitzutzisa daramoy. So tzutzisa daramoy is the way the pagans, the Arameans, they used to tie together the hair, and then it would be loosely coming out of this tied part. So too, in the case of tzitzis, like the case of tzutzisa daramoy, the tzitzis are bound together with the krichos, and then they hang loosely down. Tarabana learned in the Brisa, hitel al hakeren. In this case, he attached the tzitzis at the very, very corner of the beged. Oh, another situation, al hagdil, or he affixed his tzitzis to what's called the sfas habeged. I guess that's the lowest part of the corner of the beged. Not the edge of the beged, but the lowest part, the sfas habeged, is kshera. According to Tanakama, that's okay. No, it's even though he should have put the hole a little bit further away from the edge, let's say 3 etzbos, and he didn't do so. He put it all the way on the border, on the edge. Nevertheless, it's ksher. But Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov, Omer psula b'shteim. Whether or not he put it on the keren or he put it on the gedil, it's possible. It must, and it's critical that it be 3 etzbos away from the corner. So if you take out your tzitzis, you'll take a look and see if you can fit 3 etzbos, between the edge of the garment and the hole through which the tzitzis is put in. Kiman azal had yom Rav Gidol Marav, tzitzis tzricha sheteno tefes ala keren. Right, the tzitzis should hang over the keren, sort of like if you're walking back and forth, it'll bang up against the corner, or called the tip of the beged, shenemar al kanfei bigdeihen. So you see that this statement of Rav, in terms of where the tzitzis are located, is a reflection of what we saw in the name of Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in the Brisa, that you can't put the tzitzis on the very, very edge, but rather it's got to be a little bit above the edge so that it hangs over and bangs onto the corner, the edge of the beged. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov. Omar Rabbi Yaakov, Omar Rabbi Yochanan, v'tzorch sheyarchik melo kesher gudol. So the minimum amount of distance from the edge of the beged to the nekev, to the hole through which you put in the tzitzis, has to be melo kesher gudol. Now, I think what it means is the following. If you look at your thumb, like midway in the middle of the thumb, you have a joint, right? That's how you bend your thumb. So below kesher gudol would probably mean the thickness of the widest part of your thumb. And according to Rabbi Yochanan, that's the minimum amount of distance that the tzitz has to be put in between the edge of the beged and the hole through which the chutei tzitzis are put in. Now, this is very interesting because on the one hand, Rabbi Yochanan is talking about the minimum distance that you must leave between the corner of the beged and the tzitzis. On the other hand, we had a statement earlier of Rav Papa that the nekev should not be more than 3 etzbos above or distance from the edge of the beged. So the Gemara points out now, Itzrich Rav Papa, Itzrich Rabbi Yaakov, we need both. Why? Because first of all, we have to know how much minimum you have to distance, and number two, you have to know the maximum distance. That you can't distance the chutei tzitzis more than 3 etzbos from the corner of the beged. That's what the Gemara is going to say now. De'imid Rav Papa, if I only had the statement of Rav Papa, Hava, I would say the following. That, just 1 second. Yeah. So Rav Papa said you can't distance it more than three etzbos. Toch shalosh lirchak tfei. Maybe Rav Papa would say that as long as you keep within 3 etzbos of the edge of the beged, then it should be no further than but it can't be more than 3 etzbos distanced away from the corner, but it could be as close to the corner as possible. Itzrich Rabbi Yaakov, and Rabbi Yaakov says no. There's got to be a minimum of distance between the edge of the beged and the chutim. And that's 1 etzba. And Imir Rav Yaakov Havamino, I would have said if I only had Rav Yaakov, Melo Kesher Gudol Delo Likarev Tfei, right? As long as you don't have it within the Melo Kesher, that joint of the thumb, that's fine. But as far as how far away from the corner of the beged you can put it, Kama Derachik Maile. Maybe the better you distance it, the better. Is tzricha, therefore I need Rav Papa to say that the maximum distance from the corner of the beged would be 3 etzbos. So just to summarize, what we're saying here is that the Torah requires tzitzis al kanfei vigdehem, but it's got to be on the beged itself, not the edge of the kanaf, but it can't be too far away from the kanaf because otherwise you don't have tzitzis on the kanaf. So if it's more than 3 finger breadths, away from the kanaf, from the edge of the beged, the sfasa beged, then it's not tzitzis. Ravina v'Rav Sama v'Yasvei kami de Rav Ashi. They were sitting in front of Rav Ashi. Chazi Rav Sama lekarne de glime de Ravina de star. So Rav Sama observed that there was a hole in the corner of Ravina's beged, and that's where the tzitzis were inserted into that hole. Uvatzar mimelo kesher gudol. And apparently, the tzitzis were really low down on the corner of his beged. There was no distance of melo kesher gudol between the tzitzis and the sfas habeged. It was mamish on the sfas habeged. Amalei. So Rav Sama turns to Ravina. Just for the history of it, we'll have it right here. Ravina was from Eretz Yisrael. Rav Sama was from Bavel. Amalei. So Rav Sama said to Ravina, Lo Sover Amar Lahader of Yaakov, aren't you aware of the authoritative halacha of Rav Yaakov? And Rav Yaakov said that you have to distance the tzitzios from the corner by Melo Kesher Gudol. And now your tzitzis are really hanging down on the bottom. Amalei Ravina replied, B'shas asiyah itma. What Rav Yaakov was talking about is that when you attach the tzitzis to the beged, you've got to make sure that it's not within Melo Kesher Gudol to the Sfas HaBeged. But what happens later on is not a problem. Meaning, let's say the hole became ripped And as a result, the tzitzis now hang down very low. And now the tzitzis are already at the corner of the beged. Says Ravina from Eretz Yisrael that it's not a problem. Why? Because the whole requirement of being marchik, the minimum, as Rav Yaakov said it, of Malo Kesher Gudel, that's only in the Asiya itself, when you put the tzitzis onto the beged. Rav Sam, turned colors because he realized that he misquoted and asked the kash on Ravina's tzitzis based on his misquote of the halacha of Rav Yaakov. Amalei Rav Ashi lo tatkifloch chad minayu kitrei minan. In other words, Ravina wanted to calm down Rav Sama that he shouldn't get so isolated, so upset. So he consoled him by telling him that this is typical, that the Chachmei Bavel are not on the level of the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael. So don't think that you could aspire to live up to the level of the Chachmei Eretz Yisrael. One Chacham from Eretz Yisrael is equal to two from Bavel. Rav Acha bar Yaakov Rami Arba. Okay, so far so good. He put 4 threads of tzitzis through the hole, and they were doubled over. So now he has 4 on this side, 4 on that side, all told 8. The ayifle, right? Ayif we said was the part of the tzitzis that hang down loosely below the kricha is miaf ume'aya lehu beglime. Okay, now it seems that Rav Acha wanted to make sure that the 4 tzitzios were doubled over, were folded to make 8, before he put it into the hole. The avik le mevak. Okay, now what happens? He has the doubled over 4 chutim, which are now 8 chutim, and he puts them through the hole. And now he takes the ends of the chutim, right? I should really demonstrate this, but this is not going to help anybody. But anyway, let's say you put two chutim. Forget about 4 for a second. Just 2 chutim through a hole, right? Then what you can do is you can then wrap around the chutim through these 2. Right? Because otherwise, if you don't loop them around, then they're going to just fall out of the hole. Right? So you have to loop them around on the other side of the hole. And that's called avik le mevak. Right? He would take the ends of the threads and roll them around the other side of the beged and slip them through the loop that was formed by those chutim that he put through the hole. Kasavar be'inon tamne beglime. Ki hechid levi gedil gedilim b'makom psil. So the way Rav Acha interpreted the psukim had gedil, which is 2, and gedilim, which is 4, and it's got to be b'makom psil. You must have already the 4, which when you fold them over, you have 8, before you put them into the beged. Meaning before you we'll say push them through the hole. And Rav Yirmi Difti Rami Tamyi de Inu Shitzar. Rav Yirmi had a drasha in which you needed 8 threads, which if you double them over, you have 16, and then you put them through the hole, v'lo avik lehu. Now, if you take this literally, lo avik lehu means he would not take the ends of the string and loop them through those 4 that he put through. So then he used 8 threads. For 1 second. Okay, so Gedila means 8 threads. Fine. I don't understand what lo avik. Just give me a second here. So if I understand correctly, what Rav Yirmiyah did, as opposed to what Rav Acha did beforehand in the Gemara, is Rav Acha would take the ends of the strings and sort of put them into the loop that was formed by the four strings that went into the hole. But in the case of Rav Yirmiyah, what he did was he would send the eight, right, eight threads, right, Tamni, and he would put them through, and then he would tie a knot. So that knot was larger than the hole, and that held the eight strings from coming out of the hole. Mar Ravina, the Ravina Ovid Kididan. But the son of Ravina made the tzitz like ours, meaning four chutim passing through the hole, folded over on both sides of the hole. So you have now eight chutim. And then he would tie a knot on the hole. I'm just going to look at my tzitz because I'm pretty sure. Yeah, well, again, the knot is really the beginning of the krichos. So the krichos start after the knot. But anyway, that knot will make sure that the strings of his tzitzis will not fall out of the hole. And in this case, he's got eight strings because he put in four and folded them over, made it eight. Rav Nachman Ashkailer Rav Ada bar Ava Rami Chute. Rav Acha found Rav Ada when he was putting the chutim into the hole of the tzitzis. He made a bracha lasos tzitzis. Again, he's not even wearing the tzitzis. He's only making the tzitzis, meaning attaching them to the garment, and he's already making a bracha on asiyas tzitzis. Amalei, my tzitzi shamana. Now, I think he's playing on the word tzitzi, and tzitzi could be a kind of a sound. And it's a play on words because tzitzis is tzitzis. And he says, like I'm hearing these words coming out of your mouth. It's tzitzim, like like the birds chirping over here. You're not making any sense. We don't make a bracha. Hachi Omar Rav, I'll quote to you, Rav, tzitzis ein tzrichim bracha, meaning when you affix the tzitzis to the beged, on that asiyah, you don't make a bracha. And now the Gemara is going to embark on a question of when do you make a bracha on the asiyah? For example, with regard to setting up a sukkah, meaning putting the schach on the sukkah, do you make a bracha on that? Or creating the tefillin, do you make a bracha on creating the tefillin? And basically the rule of thumb, as we'll see, Rav's rule of thumb, is that it depends on whether or not a guy could do the asiyah. If the guy could do the asiyah, and you don't need a Jew, then you don't make a bracha on the asiyah. But if a guy is excluded, then the Jew will make a bracha on the asiyah. Ki noch nafshe de Rav Huna, when Rav Huna passed away, al Rav Chisda lemirma de Rav Adarav. Okay, I'm not exactly sure why the Gemara tells us exactly when this happened. It seems like a trivial time allotment, but in any event, so Rav Chisda comes into the Beis HaMedrash, and he asks a stira between two statements of Rav. Umi Amar Rav Tzitzein Tzarch Bracha. Is it really true that Rav holds you don't make a bracha on the asiyas hatzitzis, meaning when you put the tzitzis through the hole? Amar Rav Yehuda Rav Minayin l'tzitzis bi'ovikei chamshi psula. And again, if we're saying that when a guy puts the tzitzis into the beged, then the tzitzis are not valid tzitzis, and we're going to derive this from a pasuk, and then therefore you'd have to make a bracha when you're doing the asiyah. Because whenever a guy is pasul, a Jew makes a bracha. Shenemar, how do we know that idolater cannot put on tzitzis onto the beged? Shenemar daber el bnei Yisrael v'yasu lehem tzitzis. And now we're interpreting it. Soon we're going to have a different interpretation. The asu lahem means the Jews have to put the tzitzis on the beged. Bnei Yisrael yasu. V'lo of kochavim. Now, if Rav is saying that a guy could not affix the tzitzis to the beged, which is called tliya, then Rav would have to say that when you fix the right, Rav would have to say that when a Jew puts the chutim into the hole of the beged, he'd have to make a bracha. And we just finished saying that Rav holds that you don't make a bracha on asiyah. So we have now a stira Rav v'hamai rumya. So Gemara says this is not a contradiction. Now I'll explain the contradiction because Omer Rav Yosef, Omer Rav Chisda, Kol mitzvah sheksher b'yom v'kocham Yisrael ein tzarich levarach. Kol mitzvah psula b'yom v'kocham Yisrael tzarich levarach. How do we know whether you make a bracha on creating we'll call it a chefetz shel mitzvah? It all depends on whether an idolater could do that asiyah. And if an idolater cannot do the asiyah, then the Yisrael makes a bracha. And therefore, Rav is saying by affirming the validity of a guy. By what's the opposite of affirming? By disqualifying the asiyah of a guy with regard to tzitzis, it means that Yisrael would have to make a bracha on the asiyah tzitzis. And Rav is going on record as saying that he doesn't make a bracha on asiyah tzitzis. Frekti Gemaru klolahu. You're asking a stira based on a certain a certain rule. I don't even know if that rule is actually true, because we're going to see that a non-Jewish physician could do milah, and yet the father of the son, when he does the milah, he makes a bracha. We learned in the Brisa ir she'ein barof Yisrael. There's no, again, lechatchila, if everything is perfect, we want to go to Moel, who's a Jew. But if there's no Jewish Moel in town, then yesh baro. So now he can use an Aramoid. But wait, before we get to that, there are two doctors in town, and the question is who should do the milah. Choose one over the other. One of them is a pagan by the category is called Aramoid, right? Aramean, and the other is a Kusi. Now the Kusim underwent some sort of gerus. There's a whole machlokas whether that gerus was valid. They were attacked by lions and had a fear because they weren't observing the Jewish law. They came to gerus, but they continued to worship idols even after their conversion, and therefore this whole machlokas whether conversion is valid or not. Is Yomel Aramai v'al Yomel Kosi. According to Divrei Rabbi Meir, you should choose the Aramai and not the Kusi. Why? The Aramai doesn't have circumcision. And therefore, if you tell him to circumcise a Jewish baby, then we can assume he's going to circumcise the Jewish baby because the Jewish baby needs circumcision. Not that he's doing it for the sake of an idol. But in the case of a Kusi, who thinks that he's Jewish, and therefore he understands that he's required to do circumcision, but he's still an idol worshiper, because even after the Gerus, the Kusa was still worshiping idols, he might have in mind for the purpose of his idol. But Rabbi Yehuda Omer Kusi v'lo Aramoi. No, I would rather a Kusi than an Aramoi. And the reason for Rabbi Yehuda in the Gemara in Avodah Zarah of Vav is that we recognize the gerus of the Kusim, and we're afraid that the non-Jewish Haramoi Rofe is going to hurt the child. He's going to injure the child. Now, I'm not sure if that means because, out of anti-Semitism, or it means that he's just not a very good Rofe. I don't know. But I get the impression that it's anti-Semitism. And we see today how much the Goyim are attacking, circumcision. I think in Belgium, the outlet, whatever it is, you'll read it. You know it. Oh, so therefore, what do we see over here? We see that a non-Jew could perform Mila. And we'd rather prefer a Kusi, according to Rabbi Yehuda, because a Kusi is Yisrael. Ubi Yisrael tzarich levarech, the father of the son, when he does Mila on his son, he makes a bracha. So what's going on over here? Here we have a case of Mila, which contradicts the whole rule that was established by Rav Chizda, namely that if an akum is kosher, then Yisrael does not make a bracha. If an akum is excluded, then Yisrael makes a bracha. But here's a case where the akum is not excluded, which means Yisrael should not be making a bracha, and yet it says that Yisrael makes a bracha. So midehu time el Rav, and the Gemara is saying that what was Gemara saying now? That Rav Chizda, Rav Papa. So you're trying to prove that a guy can do the Mila. And based on that, you ask the question, how then could Rav justify that a Yisrael, the father of the son, will make a bracha? But guess what? You can't pin Rav down to that opinion that a guy could do Mila. Rav mifsal pasal. Rav is of the opinion that an idol worshiper cannot do Mila, which means that if the idol worshiper did Mila, we have to do what's called Hatafas Dam Bris. And Doru Bar Papa, one of the 10 sons of Papa, Mishmei Rav, said in the name of Rav, V'ata es brisi tishmar. And that's one drasha. We'll have Rabbi Yochanan going to support the same conclusion with another drasha. Atas brisi tishmar, meaning that you have to do the Mila, not the goyim. And Rabbi Yochanan, himol yimol, hamal yamol. Only he who's obligated to Mila does Mila. And therefore, we're going to assume that according to Rav, since a guy is pasul in Mila, and we're going to have to do a tough numbers, therefore, Rav would require a blessing, a bracha, on the part of the Aviyah Ben. And the Gemara wants to support this whole approach that if the guy is kosher, the Yisrael doesn't make a bracha. Sukkah misayel. I'll bring you support for Rav Chizda from a bris of Sukkah. And tefillin, havi tufta. But we're going to have a kash on tufta, on tefillin. Why? Hare Sukkah, the ksher b'ovikacham desanya. We're going to have a whole list of different sukkos that are valid, and one of them is Sukkahs Oved Kochavim. We have here on the top of the list Sukkahs Oved Kochavim. Then we have Sukkahs Noshim, Sukkahs Behemos, Sukkahs Kusiyim. Right? All this is about the schach. The schach was put up for this purpose, for that purpose, and it's all kosher. And Sukkah Mikol Makom Ksher. In all these cases, even though it's not the best way of doing it, it's kosher. As long as there's a schach kehilchasa. So we see here the Sukkah Sovi Kochom is kshera, and then Ubi Yisrael ain't tzarich levarach. This makes a lot of sense because we said whenever a guy is kosher, the Yisrael doesn't make a bracha. Tisan Yosef Sukkah liatzmo Omer, he makes a bracha of shachiyanu, but he does not make a bracha of leishev until he actually sits in the sukkah. There's no bracha on asiyas sukkah. And why not? Because a guy could put up a sukkah, as we saw in the Raisa, that sukkah sovi kachom ksher. However, tefillin tufta. The case of tefillin is going to undermine the entire understanding of Rav Chizda. And why is that? Hari tefillin psulos b'yovi kachavim. If an idol worshiper makes tefillin, then the tefillin are invalid, which would mean that if a Jew made the tefillin, he should make a bracha, according to the logic of Rav Chizda. To Tani Rav Chinina Berei de Rava mi Parshana.